A Girl Called Owl by Amy Wilson, Chapter 2. Clearly, I must have a father somewhere. Everybody has one after all, but Mum won't tell me who he is. There are no photos, no certificates with his name on, nothing. And whenever I ask her, she goes all misty-eyed and tells me he was a beautiful man who left her a beautiful gift. She wanders off to see him in her imagination, and she leaves me behind, in the kitchen, for example, whilst dinner starts to burn. While I was younger, she would tell me fairy tales about how they met in one of the magical wintry lands from her old storybook, and I loved them because it was magical and I was just a kid. But I got older, and it started to annoy me because I wasn't a kid anymore, and I want real answers. So she stopped with the stories and she just got vague instead. And that's the source of most of our arguments. That and the owl thing. It's nearly impossible to have a satisfying argument with my mum. She watches seriously while you make your initial point. She considers, nodding, and then she tells you something completely pointless. "Dear sweet child," she says now, deflecting my latest attempt to ask her about fatherly things as I untangle myself from my scarf after school. Some things are not supposed to wear labels or names. Some things remain a mystery, however hard we butt up against them. She smiles, pouring jasmine tea into 2 china cups and pushes one along the kitchen counter to me. "Okay, so don't you know who he is then?" "Oh, I know him," she says, picking up her own cup and looking down at the steaming amber liquid. "I've told you about him, Owl. You just never believe me." "Well, if you know him, he must have a name," I say. "And you can give it to me, can't you?" She takes a sip. "Owl, drink," she says when she's finished. "It's only good when it's hot." I take a sip. "I have nothing to give you except this moment," she says then. "That is all there is. You and I in this kitchen drinking our tea. The china cups have jade green dragons inside them, eternally chasing their tails around the white background, breathing fire at themselves. Sometimes I feel a bit like those dragons." "Oh, who needs a dad anyway?" sighs Mallory on the phone later, when I tell her of my latest failed attempt. Well, that's easy for her to say. Hers is probably outside cleaning the car right now. I look out of the window as if mine might just be there looking for me, waiting for me to notice him. Brittle autumn leaves fall from the trees on the street, and a little shiver runs down my spine. Mid-November, and winter is here. And soon there will be frost and ice sweeping over the rooftops, curling down trees, making the grave pavements sparkle. The thought makes my skin itch, and it makes me impatient. The need to know where I come from is almost overwhelming. "And flippin' annoying," Mallory's voice cuts in. "Honestly, you don't need a dad, Owl." "I do," I tell her firmly. "At least his name." "You are a bit fixated on names. And why do you think that is?" "Mallory isn't all that, you know. It's the name of Enid Blyton's school, for goodness sake." That's true enough, but it is better than Owl. We spend the rest of the conversation talking about Justin. Mallory talks a lot about Justin. She's convinced they're soulmates, even though he's going out with Daisy. "Double English tomorrow," she says as we say our goodbyes. "A whole hour and a half of English, which means sharing a class with Justin, which means they'll compete with each other every time a question is asked and try to answer it in the most complicated literary way possible. And I just have to sit there and watch it all. I feel a bit stupid. I usually have a couple of new owls by the time I come out of English lessons. I chuck the phone onto my bed with a huff, and I go to the window, muttering to the carved owl on the bedpost about how boys just complicate everything. As I watch, half distracted, something moves between the trees outside the flat, something lean and hunched with spidery limbs, something so alien and out of place that my skin tightens with fear before I've even worked out what it is. I lean closer to get a better look, my breath misting the glass, but all I can see is shadows. I have a good imagination. It was probably just a fox. I pull the curtains with a sharp tug, and I tell myself off for being such a kid. About the legends Mum used to tell me. She hasn't got that old book out for years now. I do sort of miss it. I'd never admit it, but when I struggle to get to sleep, sometimes I imagine those stories were true, and my father really is from some great fantasy land. I remember the way her voice changed as she told me of those strange places, the way her eyes glazed as she spoke of fairies and sprites, talking trees and fearsome queens. Sometimes it was a little scary, as if I'd lost her to that other world. It was ever winter there, the deepest, coldest, the bluest winter, the winter of the world. The sky changed as day turned to night and night to day once more. But the sun was a cold white disk in the sky, and the moon shone brighter against the darkness, but still there was no heat about it. Her ears screamed with the dead silence in the air. Her chest burned to breathe against the bitter of the wind. He found her in the clearing between the trees that towered out in every direction, black with bark and white with frost. He found her by the plume of her breath, by the snap of frozen twigs beneath her boots as she turned and turned and turned again, waiting for something to become familiar. Nothing was familiar. He was blue-white, as if he'd never seen the summertime. His eyes were mirrors in the dawn, and his dark hair was tipped with the frost of the land. When he reached out his hand, she thought it would be like ice. It was not. He gestured back the way he'd come, and his grip tightened. He breathed in and prepared to launch her questions at him, but even as her lips gathered, he shook his head and put a finger to her mouth. Not here, not now. But why am I here? And what is this place? And where is home? And where am I? And who are you? He considered her and took his hands away, and she was colder than she had ever been and clung to herself. But he was quick to unclasp his robe and sweep it across her shoulders. Once more he took her hand. Now we run. The cloak he'd drawn around her was charcoal grey and heavy. It was the rough smooth of new wool, and though the plain was freezing and the wind howled in her ears, she was not